Since Galileo invented the telescope in 1609, we've been using it to gaze at and learn from the stars. NASA spends considerable time looking at our own star, the sun. And recently, it captured some video so intriguing, we just had to stare at the sun for a while ourselves. Since 2008, NASA's twin stereo telescopes have been orbiting the sun from 95 million miles above its surface.
We have two eyes looking at the sun to observe it in the ultraviolet and X-rays. And this allows us to draw 3D representations of what's happening with the sun.
Makes sense, but this does not. On March 13th, 2020, the stereo telescopes are doing their usual thing, and their heliospheric imager is monitoring the solar winds in interplanetary space. The sun is to the left of the frame, Venus and Earth are in the shot, when suddenly, this rounded object comes into the image, apparently on a collision course with the sun. Watch in slow motion. It looks like a wheel made from two circles connected by spokes with a strange beam projecting toward the sun. It doesn't look like a solar flare, magnetic field, or plasma discharge to Olashei's trained eye.
This does not look like anything we've ever seen close to the sun, so it does not appear to be a natural phenomenon.
When the video appeared, it created a huge buzz, according to forensic investigator Chase Klotsky.
Immediately, everybody was jumping on, is that a UFO? What is that object? UFO reports often come in from people that have seen things come out of the sun.
You could say that again. There have been dozens of strange UFO-like objects spotted rushing into or away from the sun. And the wheel looks strikingly similar to a space station once envisioned by famed rocket scientist Wernher von Braun. So we have to wonder, could this wheel-shaped object be some sort of craft? Astrophotographer Andrew McCarthy thinks it's possible.
I really can't rule it out. I really can't rule it out that it might be some type of structure.
But why would any craft, alien or human, charge toward the sun? And how could it survive?
The sun's corona is millions of degrees. It's actually the hottest part of the sun. So it would be a smart place for an alien spacecraft to refuel its ship because of the abundance of energy.
A million-degree refueling station. That's a lot of heat to endure to top off your tank. To test out this theory, we turn to the best in the business, Mars mission planner Jonathan Hill.
When you compare the size of this pinwheel to the size of Earth and the size of Venus, this wheel would be
a huge object that's much larger than even Jupiter. So if this was a physical object that had gravity, our planet would have altered its course around the sun, and really bad things would have started happening.
So we can definitely rule out that the wheel is some sort of actual physical object traveling through space just based on its size.
That would also rule out a giant spaceship. But Hill thinks the explanation is right there in the image.
If we watch how that pinwheel shape moves, it moves at the same speed, but in the opposite direction as the Venus dot does.
That symmetrical motion suggests the wheel is a reflection of Venus. So why does it look like a wheel?
Light is coming into the camera and it's bouncing around in a weird way and creating what we call a ghost image.
And it shows up as this wheel shape.
And as for those other objects that were caught filling up at the sun's corona, some defy an easy answer. But according to NASA, a few are comets, others are Venus passing the sun, and others are solar flares and strange reflections in the camera. So what looked like a spaceship turned out to be a ghost image of Venus. But there will soon be a real spacecraft flying near the sun, ours. NASA's Parker Solar Probe launched in 2018. It will travel directly through the sun's corona 3 times. For decades, we've been sending probes to Mars, and ever since, strange images have been captured on the surface of the red planet. Could this be a floating spoon? Or this, a statue? What about this? The face of a god? But then, in the spring of 2020, things got really strange when an amateur astronomer claimed the cameras on the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter photographed this. Take a closer look. It appears to be a group of buildings and pyramids on Mars, one even in the shape of an eagle's head. George Haas is the director of the Esoteric Cydonia Institute. He believes this could be evidence of an ancient civilization on Mars.
The first structure to get my attention is this four-sided pyramid that has a conjoined mound at the top. These are large geoglyphic formations that show intelligent design. All kinds of formations that appears to be a city.
George also believes these Martian pyramids are eerily similar to the ancient Mayan pyramids in Mexico.
It looks a lot like the Pyramid of the Moon in Teotihuacan. You have a four-sided pyramid with this platform or porch that's jutted off the one end of the pyramid. And they're almost identical.
Forensic investigator Chase Klotsky says there's a case to be made for past life on Mars.
There is physical evidence, scientific evidence, that there was once water on Mars. So if the water was there, it easily could have supported civilization.
So where did the Martians go? One popular theory, they were destroyed by nuclear war. The possible evidence? Atmospheric traces of an element called Xenon-129.
Xenon-129 is a signature of artificial nuclear explosions.
A 1 megaton bomb can completely level a radius of nearly 4 miles. But before we mourn the annihilation of Martian civilization, let's determine if there was a civilization at all. We took these photos to the best in the field, Mars mission planner Jonathan Hill. Hill begins by examining the large eagle's head structure. Could that be by design?
We see cliff faces along the edge, nice gentle slopes that are consistent with ice deposits that we see on similar mesas throughout the planet.
Hill says those lines indicate a natural formation, and geological analysis of the area confirms it.
So using ground-penetrating radar from orbit, we can see down into different layers of these mesas to see what they're made out of. And the entire mesa is rock and water ice, and so that obviously rules out any artificial metals or other materials.
But what about the nearby pyramid? George Haas claims it's a mirror image of the Pyramid of the Moon in Mexico. Were the two built by the same hands?
When you look at it, the difference between an actual pyramid is that all the angles are perfect. They were artificially engineered. When you look at a mesa like this, the edges aren't straight, they're all curves. The top is not centered. The geometry is just not there.
And that evidence of nuclear war on Mars? The Xenon-129?
Xenon is a naturally occurring gas. We find traces of it in our atmosphere here on Earth, so it's not surprising that we find traces of it on Mars.
After years of studying the Red Planet and claims of amazing structures there, Hill believes there's a psychological explanation for what people think they are seeing on Mars, the phenomenon known as pareidolia.
It's basically where the human brain goes a little too far, and it implants patterns where patterns don't exist. And so I think people have to really prove to themselves that they're not being affected by this known effect.
So it's simply a trick of the eye. And turns out that sometimes we'll see things we want to see and not what's actually there. So our verdict? Pareidolia. But don't let that stop you from looking up at the stars for that alien life. We may still find the proof one day. It's March 2020 in the English port town of Falmouth. A local property developer is taking a late winter's walk with his dog near the coastal cliffs. He's watching the ships pass by when something catches his eye that demands documentation.
He saw this large ship here, not exactly floating on the water, but above it.
And this is not the only hovering ship caught on camera off the southern coast of England. A video from May 2021 shows a large container ship floating above the water surface near the town of Kent. As anomalous as these images appear, there's a long tradition of floating ships that goes back to the 9th century. One intriguing story from a Spanish-born priest serving in Lyon, France, involves a group of sailors from a realm called Magonia.
According to legend, the Magonians had developed the ability to use magic and witchcraft to make their boats float through air instead of on water. There are these mystery boats that float through the air and during lightning and thunderstorms come down and wreak havoc upon the countryside, stealing grain and wheat from people's fields.
Then, in the 1960s, famed French astronomer and UFO researcher Jacques Vallée gave this theory a modern twist in his book, Passport to Magonia, From Folklore to Flying Saucers.
And in it, he describes that this could have been something interdimensional or even a parallel dimension vasting space and time.
Vallée's theory is that the legendary flying Magonian ships of the 9th century are connected to the more recent UFO sightings of the 1950s and 60s. Evidence, he claimed, that time-traveling aliens have visited the planet for centuries. That's all fascinating, but before we stamp our passport to Magonia, let's figure out what this particular floating ship represents. A true mystery, or just a fascinating trick of the eye? First, you know we have to ask, could this photo have been doctored?
I see no signs of artifacts or doctoring. So that tells me that what we're looking at is authentic and was actually captured in camera.
And by checking the ship tracking sites, photography expert Andrew McCarthy is actually able to determine that these ships are very much of this dimension.
We know that it was a Norwegian tanker ship called the Maribel, which suggests to me that what we're looking at is not a levitating ship, but something else at play.
So if it's a real ship under sail, then what's causing this strange effect?
At a certain distance, you're no longer really looking at the ocean because the air is reflecting the sky back towards you. That's why the horizon actually drops in this image.
In other words, that's not really the sky. It's the reflection of the sky off the water in the far distance. We see the same effect in the video from Kent.
It's actually what's called a false horizon. The surface of the water, as you get further out, is a bit calmer out here than it is back here. Because it's calmer and flatter, it's reflecting things more evenly. You just get a more even reflection of the sky.
You can see this line looks like the horizon, but on a 2D plane, it's actually up here. That's because all of the water in the area is the same color as the sky it's reflecting and blending into. Our verdict, this is simply an optical illusion. This is just the sky reflecting off the water. But it makes you wonder, were similar odd sights centuries ago what gave rise to the legend of Magonia? It's May 2012 in South Ayrshire, Scotland. Engineer and professional trainer Chris Croft is traveling up from England with his wife.
I did a bit of research on things to see in Scotland, and there was this thing called the electric bray, and they said it's one of the weirdest things you'll ever see, and you have to see it.
Chris and his wife arrive at the Bray, which in Scottish means hillside. He gets out of his car, but then his car does something remarkable.
This is a car rolling uphill at the electric Bray. Let's have a look at it from the other angle.
My first thought was, is it magnetism? Is it some weird gravity effect? Because it absolutely feels like that. How can things roll uphill?
And Chris isn't the only one to capture this strange sight.
This is crazy.
In January 2020, travel journalist Bridget Barbara showed that not only cars, but also balls seem to roll up the slope of this roadway. So what's the deal?
The sort of notorious name Electric Bray comes from the fact that many people who have witnessed this sort of anomaly feel that it had to do with electricity being installed in the area.
They started to wonder if there could be some electromagnetic field that's moving objects up this hill.
So let's take another look at this car rolling uphill. The camera catches it from multiple angles, and it seems clear that the car is going up the slope, contrary to all the known laws of physics. We don't have Sir Isaac Newton on staff, but let's see if our experts can figure out what's going on here.
If it was magnetism that was dragging the car uphill, it would have to be tremendously big and huge. And we don't see that anywhere. We don't see a gigantic magnet pulling this object up.
One experiment suggests a magnet would need to be 6 miles wide in order to pull a small car up a hill. And physicist Dr. Hakeem Olushehi says there's another problem.
Not every object that's moving up the road is made of metal. A ball is not made of metal. It is not a conductor.
Our physicists believe the explanation of this strange video lies not in electricity, but in geography.
We judge our orientation on the planet Earth by looking at the horizon. But the horizon here is not flat. It's tilted. As a consequence, the brain could become confused as to what really is horizontal. And perhaps that's the key to how you can ride something uphill.
What appears to be up and down is all relative. You can get fooled, you can get tricked.
The slope of this hill is very slight, rising only 17 feet over a quarter mile. This gradual slope surrounded by the unusual landscape leads to the confusion. And Chris says it can be hard to switch your brain back around.
I was saying to myself, looking down this hill, this is actually uphill, and it must be just the shape of the mountain behind that's making me feel that. But I couldn't flip it in my mind.
Our verdict, this is an optical illusion. The surrounding landscape makes what's going down look like it's going up. Scientists say our brains take in so much information that in filtering some things out, they can make us see things that aren't real.